Number 37 in the 50 most relevant players for AFL Fantasy, SuperCoach and Dream Team for your 2025 season. That is what we are looking at today on the episode. It is the multi-time Brownlow Medalist and now Premiership player, Lachie Neale. Joining me to talk through his fantasy potential across all the formats. Does regression come? Is there another career year to go? Or are some budding Cubs going to take some of the limelight? We will talk about all that and more on this episode of the 50 Most Relevant. Joining me on the podcast 2 times in a row without a docker. Yet he's not just a one club specialist. He's a constant part of the coaches panel. Mini Monk, nice to see you. Gee whiz, I love Lachie.
I do as well. He's a good player. But you found a way to give me not a docker, but an ex-docker.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, okay. You really do narrow me into a pigeonhole. I've got to really try and escape this one, not be stereotyped into the same type.
This is not good. We're getting into dangerous territories. It also is good news for Adam Treloar, finishing his time as a docker, given we spoke about him a couple of days ago. Let's jump in to Lachie Neale. Midfield eligible, has basically been that. In fact, I think he has all of his AFL career and fantasy footy eligibility. An average of 101 last year in fantasy means he's priced in and around that $1 million markers for us across AFL Fantasy and for Dream Team. While in SuperCoach, there is not too many better scorers in the game, and there hasn't been for the past decade than him. A 119.9 seasonal average means he's at a rarefied price point air. $645,900, 22 games last year. And a massive 179 was his highest score last year against the Crows in SuperCoach. But you've still got to add another 20 points to basically hit his career high score of a few years earlier against the Bombers, a 198. While in AFL Fantasy, that same game against the Crows, that was his top score in SuperCoach. It was the same in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, a 143 and a 169 against the GWS Giants. A fair while ago now, to be said, a 2016 career high score. Mini, this guy does it all, doesn't he? He's a stoppage clearance king. He's a contested possession beast. His ability to find his teammates in absolute congestion by hand and by foot is scary elite. And something he's added to his game over the last couple of years is we're now seeing the reward for high-end running. We're seeing him now get involved in scoring chains and impacting the scoreboard directly himself. It should be no surprise he's not only in the 50 most relevant, but he's one of the best midfielders in the AFL right now and has been for a number of years.
I mean, you stating the obvious. He's got 2 Brownlows. Of course he's one of the best midfielders in the competition. But we see it. I mean, you see it in his SuperCoach scoring, you see it in his fantasy scoring, you see it in, if you just watch Brisbane play, you can just tell he's a good player. He knows how to do the in and out stuff, gets the ball from the inside to the outside, he's got hands like no other player, and he spreads really hard. Like, he is always in line for those +6s. He's got the tank to be able to keep running for days. And I think that's how he's been able to evolve his game and be able to stay so relevant for us in fantasy, because to be at that elite tier, you have to be able to do it all. You have to be able to win that inside ball. You have to be able to lay tackles, which, despite his relatively small stature, he's still able to do. And you have to be able to get a lot of that outside pill as well. And he just spreads. He gets involved. He kicks an occasional goal. You'll find him right in the deep 50, right in the forward 50. And that's what you'd love to see, you know. The only thing that really holds him back, and this is a very big nitpick, he just gets tagged. And when you're at that elite tier, what can you do about that? You know, coaches are going to try and stop the best player in a team. And he quite certainly is up there for the Brisbane Lions, and he is definitely a taggable player. But the good news is with tags, they're quite forecastable for someone like Lachie Neale.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've been surprised. Like, we're talking Geelong throwing an absolute rarity. Yeah, let's throw like a College Asney type on him and shut him down. It has been a while since these have not been predictable. When we look at what he did last year in AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach, it's kind of crazy just how good he is. And if you listen to the 50 most relevant, maybe you've seen the thumbnail and gone, I'm an AFL Fantasy, I'm a Dream Team coach. I don't really have any interest in him. It's like, sure, I hear that argument, but give us 10 more minutes to change your mind, because even though you might be initially going, 100 average, boys, jog on. Trust me, give us 10 minutes. We'll show you the pathway for why and how he's relevant. But last year, a 101 average, 12 tons, 8 over 120. So that's a crazy good conversion rate. So that when he gets that 100, he's more likely than not turning this into captaincy territory scoring. That comes to those areas you mentioned before, Minnie, of just his ability to get involved in all dynamics of the game is crazy. Like, he's ranked 31st for total points last year, 28th across the entire competition for average. But when you just look at the pure mids, he's 16th by average and 17th for total points. So he's right at that upper echelons in fantasy. And in SuperCoach, it's better. 0.1 away from a 120 seasonal average. 17 tons. Hitting double figures of that hitting 120s, including a 143, 3 scores over 160, and a 179. You put a VC or a C on that, you are heading towards not just a 2,500 plus round, 2,700 sort of round. It's crazy. 8th for points, 7th for average overall, top 6 for points for mids, top 3 by average for mids. And he's just been doing it for a decade. Like, I went through and looked at what was his overall seasonal ranking for the past 10 years. This is what it is in AFL Fantasy. 31, 28, 145. He played 15 games. He got injured multiple times. Then 1, 12, 22, 34, 4, and 16. That is 4 top 12 overall scores. And then in SuperCoach, it's better. 8, 10, 1, 152. Yep, same year he got injured. 1, 4, 8, 17, 5, and 15. Definitely in SuperCoach. There's rarefied air. You could say someone's been as good, let alone better than Lachie Neale for the past decade.
I think giving those rankings almost doesn't give it justice to just how good it actually was as well. I mean, in AFL Fantasy, since 2015, he's averaged over 100 in all but 3 of those seasons. And one of those seasons was the COVID year where he actually even almost got to 100. He got to 98. Games. The year after, he was injured and he still got to 95.
Yeah.
Whereas in SuperCoach, there's only the 1 year below 100. Just the one, the year that he got injured. And you know what he averaged? 99.8.
Oh.
Just 0.2 off of averaging the 100. Since 2015, he has 3 years of 120 or above, basically, including last year where he got 119.9. It's close enough. Another 3 of those are in the 110 markers. And there's a 134 averaging season in SuperCoach. It is ridiculous numbers for a player over that length of time. And the fact that he is still as good as he was back then, you know, he's won the Brownlow in 2023. He's a darn good player, and he will just continue to chug along, you know. Any role concerns that you have of players when you're talking about your starting squad? Are they going to play 60% mid, 70% mid, 80% mid? Are they going to be shuffled half forward? Are they going to move to half back? Neale is not that type of player.
I have
you know exactly
concerns.
Where he's going to be lining up.
Yeah, like...
You know exactly where he's going to line up.
Yeah, 32 during the year, so currently 31. They've just come off that premiership. I think every Brisbane Lions fan knows, let alone inside the club, while they've got some nice younger pieces that are coming through, and they have been given some nice father, son, and academy gifts over the last couple of years, it is definitely safe to say. They are clearly aware that where their age profile and their list profile is, they are full flooring it for what it is. Like, Zorko's arguably in his final year. Neale has only got a couple of years left. Their talls at both ends of the ground are on borrowed time, in the sense of they don't have a decade left. There's single seasons left to go. Dunkley's on the latter part of his 20s than his earlier. So the core of their premiership is now. They are still competing for now. And I know, and we do need to talk about the competing players that are coming. We need to talk fixtures and the tag. But I think that's something that's super important, is there is no instability in that centre bounce role. It's clear. It's Dunkley, and it's him as the 80% centre bounce attendees. Yes, Ashcroft is probably going to pick up a little bit more, but I don't think that hurts his scoring, let alone his centre bounce presence at all.
No, you talk about a 1-2 punch in midfields. That's a 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
You've got Neale as the smaller in and under guy who can get the ball out to the outside players. And you've got Dunkley as the bigger body to be able to protect him, to lay the tackles, to hold the ball in when they need it. And you just pick a third that goes alongside those two for the majority of the game, 2 games below 80% CBAs for the entirety of 2024. And one of them was because they had to bring in a player to try and execute a bit more of a tag. If you're telling me that my player that I'm owning is going to get 80 to 85% of CBAs every week, I say, sign on the dotted line. Thank you very much. Yes, people are going to be concerned because there's Will Ashcroft and there's Levi Ashcroft. You've got Rayner, you've got McCluggage, you've got a multitude of players they might actually try and run through that midfield. But it's the core that you have to worry about, and those two are the core, and Neale being a part of that is just not going to change.
No, I don't see that changing. The biggest concern that people have around starting Lachie Neale is the tag. How many does he get? When do they come? Because he, of almost all premium mids, is the most impacted by it. When we see a Zach Merritt or a Jordan Dawson, a Marcus Bontempelli, a Zach Butters get tagged, they've got a little bit more positional diversification about them, these types of players, that all of a sudden Dawson or Bont, they can move to half forward or they can move to a half back position. These other guys can expose their opponents forward. Whereas Neale, while he can play those elements, often they just go, right, we're going to absorb this lack of Neale's impact and we're going to play through other dimensions and trust that his work rate, which is really, really high, ultimately helps the team win. And Neale's at that place of his career where he's got personal accolades, he's now got premierships, whatever gets him to back to that final day in September, hoping for his sake, the 3rd year in a row, I'm sure, that he's like, I don't care if I get tagged out of a game or two. Like last year, there's a couple of really key instances. Round 14, Marcus Windhager shuts him down to a 50 in fantasy, a 70 in SuperCoach. A month and a bit later, it's James Jordan, a 69 in fantasy, a 78 in SuperCoach. There are other instances over the past few years to go it down, but we know when a real tight clamp is coming, okay, this is not the week to put the VC or C on Lachie Neale. When I look at that early fixture, Mini Monk, is there any obvious concerns for those starting or hindrances to jumping on board?
I mean, you just talked about the teams that have tagged him last year. They do face one of them in round 1, unfortunately, in Sydney. Yeah. I wouldn't be shocked to see James Jordan go to him.
Yeah.
But I've got a narrative for you.
Please.
What if Jordan's not playing? What if Jordan doesn't play round 0, doesn't play round 1?
I love it.
And Neale is off the chain. Have a look at his fixture after that. And the other reason is, yes, we've got that round 3 bye that has Sydney, Collingwood, Geelong, and Brisbane on it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have many mids that we're super interested in. Yes, some teams will be looking at Dacos. Some teams will be looking at Goulden.
Yep.
But most of the issues associated with that buy are associated with our backlines at this stage.
That's true.
If you're telling me I could have a look at Neale with fixtures of Richmond and West Coast either side of that buy with captaincy potential, and he doesn't get the tag in round 1, I'm very interested, especially for SuperCoach, because if you can get on the end of a 160, 170 vice captaincy score and you're in best 18 in those 2 weeks as well, hello.
That makes everything incredibly interesting because round 1, it's rolling lockout. You look at where Sydney sit themselves in that round 1 fixture, you've got potential parachutes. Should you need them, if it's like, oh no, Jordan is named or is a late in, okay, I can correct course if I want to and go and get anything else you like. Or if, as you've mentioned, there is this pathway of an Eagles and a Tigers matchup in best 18 with a VC outcome and then some reasonable fixtures straight after it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, he could fly out of the gate with a 130 average quickly in fantasy. And he's shown over time in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team that over an 8 to 10 week stretch, he's as good as anyone. And more often than not, it's in season than the start of season. But I've just looked at the last 2 years. There's been this narrative with Lachie Neale that has almost been like clockwork, which had been, look, didn't have the hottest of starts. Now, fixture is a part of that, absolutely. And Minnie's just highlighted a beautiful fixture pathway that could be there. But in 2024, at the end of round 7, he's going on an average of 81.8. The next 10 games, he clocks up an average of 112.8. These are season-winning moves. While in 2023, at the end of round 8, he's going at an average of 89. The next 2 months, he goes at an average of 111.5. So you might be an AFL Fantasy and Dream Team coach going, oh, yeah, he had a good 2020. He's had a few decent years, but he's not relevant, MJ and Minimo. Hang on a second. Any guy that can put that type of scoring on his head, be a captaincy option for 2 to 3 months, let alone to do it at the potential value point that he might be during a season, if the fixture's right. Relevance and the 50 most relevant, Mini, is not just about 50 players you should think about in your starting squad, is it? It is players that are relevant for the season for a reason.
He's priced at 101. If he goes at 110, 115 AFL Fantasy up until his round 16 bye, and then there's the tags in the back half of the season, you say, you know what? You've done me good. I'm jumping off. I'm going somewhere else. He's got the perfect buy to do that, you know? Last buy round, you can trade him out, pick whichever mid you want to go to. You are absolutely laughing. The price tag is there for the upside for a player that we know can do it for stretches. He can do 110, 115 for 8 to 10 weeks. You just have to jump off at the right time. And thankfully, with a player like him, that right time is always very well telegraphed.
It totally is. What happens in round 1 and the squads that Sydney name could be the difference between starting him or not. But in SuperCoach, let's be honest, you get to the end of July, and if you don't have Lachie Neale in your side, chances are you haven't had a great year if he's been fit and available to play every single week. If he's playing, he's going to be pushing the thresholds of one of the best midfielders for us in the year. And in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, history tells us over the past 8 years, there is a stretch of 2 months where he gets on absolute fire, matches it with the top end, and when you have him, it's a separation space. When to get Lachie Neale is the question, not should you get Lachie Neale in 2025. I've got one more question I want to ask you before we talk about where you should be drafting him on the keeper platform when you're heading to draft day. And that is, there's this rise of Will Ashcroft that we have to talk about. Now, you don't win a Norm Smith medal and come back from an ACL as brilliant as he did without thinking and believing there's going to be some level of impact on how the ball is distributed. We've talked about a clear, unchanging centre bounce dynamic, and I agree. But does this impact some of the market share of the Lions? Does Ashcroft's work rate clip? Does some regression come as he ages and the premiership hangover? Like, is there a pathway? Because all we've done for the past 10 minutes is talk about his brilliance and when and why we should get on him. But is there a world to you that there's enough variables to pull the thread to go, actually, even with a juicy fixture at the start, maybe just watch and wait before you jump?
Look, it's a concern. You always do have to be concerned when there's a player that's on such a rise as Will Ashcroft is. But is Neale really the one that you're going to be concerned about losing out? I mean, if you're at the coalface for 80% of the game, if you're the person that they look to get the 45-degree kickoff to be able to get a +6, to be able to move the ball up the ground, that has a tank like he has where he's playing 90% time on ground, I don't think it's the concern that it's him that loses out. I think it's probably some of the other midfielders, like the likes of McCluggage, like the likes of Berry losing out on CBAs, like, Cam Rayner as well. those are the players that I see the share being taken out of rather than Neale himself. It could be that he gets a 5 to 10 point drop in Supercoach and a 5-point drop in AFL Fantasy from it, but I'm not sure I see it. I don't think that it's going to come from him.
Yeah. So the question is when, not if, you're going to own Lachie Neale in Supercoach. And the question is, where is the hot 2 months coming for Lachie Neale? With no James Jordan in round 1, there's enough moments that could be he comes out of the gate like he did in 2022 and is just knocking out those 120 scores, not just in Supercoach, but in AFL Fantasy as well. Or is it like the previous few seasons where it's a couple of months into the year, he gets to his bottomed out price, and then it is time to jump on and to attack? He is incredibly relevant across all the formats for us in 2025. But if you're drafting on the Keeper platform for your single season, Keeper or Dynasty League, which is where the coaches panel chooses to draft in 2025, it's a fascinating one because in an AFL Fantasy scoring, which is what the Keeper's default is, his average would say he's probably an M2. And if it's more the Supercoach scoring style, or you're drafting on the Supercoach platform, well, he's undeniable M1. So let's talk Supercoach for a sec, because I think this is one of the first few players we really need to separate format and scoring out from the 50. He's a clear M1, probably a first rounder in Supercoach.
Oh, definitely a first rounder.
But is he a top 5 selection in a Supercoach draft?
The other thing that goes to him so heavily in draft is that he just rarely misses games. You know, he had that one injury-affected season in 2021. He missed 1 game last year. Aside from that, he basically just does not miss. And when you've got a player that can pump out a 120 season and play almost every game and has the consistency where you know, oh, he's going to have a bad game because he's going to get tagged. Oh, maybe my league allows me to loophole. Maybe I can put the E on him and see what he scores and then go from there. Or maybe I've got a player that has a better matchup and I just take it on. When it's as telegraphed as he is, I think it just comes so much to the fore as to how useful a draft asset he is. I don't think he's a top 5 pick. You know, the Rucks just score so well in Supercoach. You're probably not taking him before someone like Bontempelli.
No.
You've probably got, you know, people will consider taking someone like Dacos ahead of him.
Sheasel,
some of the defenders, or maybe even a forward, a Sheasel.
Yeah.
But I think around that 6, 7, 8 marker, he is right in the conversation to be taken at that point. And if you're at the back end of the first round and he gets to you, you need to gobble that up.
Absolutely. In AFL Fantasy or on the Keeper platform, M2 is his average. But I feel like there's a little bit of disrespect. Now, he's got the triple figure average. It will help. But do you see a world where he could drift to an M3? Obviously, you'd have to go mid to probably make that happen. But could he sneak to an M3 and, dare I say it, even an early 4th round, late 3rd selection? Is that too pushing the friendship?
He might be valued that way by some coaches. It depends how long their memory is, you know? If you've been playing fantasy for a long time and you can remember some of the highs that he has had, like, you know, 98 in a COVID season or 110 7 years ago, you know what type of asset he can be. I don't think he goes in the first 2 rounds. I think he at least goes in the 3rd round. But if you're at the back end of the 3rd round and turning into the 4th and you've got 2 mids already, pairing him as your M3 and grabbing another Lion as your 4th round pick sounds great to me. So I think he's a 3rd round pick. And if you can get him as a late 3rd, beautiful.
It'd be an amazing outcome. Hey, mate, always an absolute pleasure talking fantasy footy with you. We will have you back on deck in a couple more days' time, talking about another player in the 50 most relevant.
Sounds good. Can't wait for it.
Yeah, me too, man. If you want to go and check out any of the other players revealed in the 50 so far, the good news is on whatever platform you're listening or watching this, you can go and do it. If you are watching this on YouTube, if you haven't subscribed and you haven't liked the video, the good news is it only takes a couple of seconds. You can do that right now. And the video will still keep going while you're doing it. And while you're there on YouTube, comment below and let me know, what is your predicted average for him in 2025. Keen to get your thoughts. If you're listening, this is an audio podcast and you haven't given it a 5-star rating, we'd so greatly appreciate if you could do that and share this podcast with a friend in either your draft league or that's in your usual classic league so they can, give them a hand out a little bit by giving them a hand up with the Coaches Panel podcast. You can grab all of these things across social media. You can get in touch with us while we're there. And in the description of this episode are the links to get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch. It's been a busy day over the past couple of days with plenty of people ordering. And we do give you an extra little surprise when you pick up some merch. What that is, we have to order it to find out exactly what it is. And you become a Patreon, whether it be at the cash cow tier right through to the breakout or the premium tiers. There are extra rewards that come your way, as well as the support you give to the Coaches Panel this 2025 preseason. So who's in at number 36? Can you believe we're we're nearing halfway? I know we're closer to a third than a half. But we are charging through this year's 50 most relevant. I hope you've been enjoying it. Who's up next? This is my clue for you. It's hard to say that a premium defender and a genuine premium defender has multiple pathways to further upside to what they have right now. And this player has at least 2. It's not something that can be said for many of these top-line premium defenders. But this player has a clear 2. Who are we talking about? And will one, none, or both of these pathways land his way to take him from already near the top of his line to the absolute best of his best? Because he's got the game, the skill, and the team that could see him become the number 1 defender if one or both of these variables go his way. Who is he? Find out tomorrow in the 50 Most Relevant.